Hey, there we go. We are live for International Podcast Day 2018. Hope everybody's doing well. And as I bring up my notes here, we've got a great lineup for you this year. And I got to tell you, every year is so unique and so interesting. And I just never get surprised as to what people are doing out there. But we're going to get into that. Before I really get started, I do want to make sure that we all keep in our minds and our hearts the current victims and human suffering that's going on in Indonesia right now, based on the 7.5 earthquake and the tsunami that has absolutely devastated them currently. So, as we tend to celebrate, let's also keep our minds and our hearts in prayers if you pray for the victims currently in Indonesia. So everyone, welcome to International Podcast Day 2018, our 5th year, and we're going to get into some of that in just a few minutes. But you know what? There's a few things we got to do first, right? International Podcast Day is a celebration, right? So when I say international, you're going to say what, folks?
Podcast Day.
Here we go. Okay, so let's do it. International
Podcast Day.
Well, that wasn't too bad. I hope everybody in the audience is doing the same thing. But that's the motive and the information that we really want to get cranking across social media by telling everybody about podcasting, about podcasts, about whatever it is about this craft that we really enjoy by using the hashtag internationalpodcastday.com. So I got a few introductions to do. First of all, my name is Steve Lee. But it really doesn't matter because what's really important is what we're going to be doing over the next couple of days, the next 30 hours of streaming and celebrating and enjoying the things we love. First, I would like to introduce Dave Lee, who's one of the co-founders of International Podcast Day. He's been podcasting since 2007 and is a 4-time Podcast Award finalist. And I want to say this straight up right now. If not for Dave Lee, this year, International Podcast Day wouldn't have happened, and you worked your tail off, and I appreciate it, Dave.
Well, absolutely. Hey, everybody out there in podcast land. I am Dave Lee, co-founder of International Podcast Day. Yeah, Steve, thank you so much for those kind words. I know just like everything in the podcast space and with our industry, it's an ebb and flow, right? Steve takes care of all the technical things. I do a lot of the sponsorships and putting the whole schedule together. And this year we've had amazing podcasters, 40 plus podcasters that are representing 16 different countries this year. That is a record for us here at International Podcast Day. So we're talking 30 plus hours of international flair. Those podcasters sharing their expertise, their knowledge and their message with you without borders, without boundaries. And that is one of the beauties of the podcasting space, is that no matter where you're at, no matter what time it is, you're going to be out there. You're going to be celebrating with us today. So on behalf of myself, Steve, and also Jim and Dave that are on this kickoff as well, happy International Podcast Day, everybody. Thank you for getting out there and using the hashtag because it's amazing to go out there and see all the different podcaster meetups that are going on, the different way that the podcast listener is out there celebrating as well, going out there, rating, reviewing your favorite podcast, sending that email to your podcast host that you've been putting off for a while, right? And also just getting out there and sharing the word of podcast with your friends, your family, your coworkers, whoever it is. So thank you for everybody that has made this event a success year after year. And we just continue to grow. And for that, I'm endlessly thankful. So back to you, Steve.
Well, Dave just did the whole entire introduction of the kickoff, so I guess we're done. That was great, Dave, and I really appreciate it. Now, we have a couple super guys on right now with us too, and I love it. They're wearing their International Podcast Day shirts. I mean, we're really rocking and rolling. We got to get you some hats, though. I mean, especially as you get older and you got to cover up that stuff so it doesn't bounce off and make things shiny and whatnot like me. But first of all, I want to introduce an individual that is so important and so critical to the podcasting space. And if I went through all his credentials, it would take the entire 30-hour stream to get through them all. And that is Mr. Jave Jackson, who is actually one of the original founders with Dave and I of Podcast Day. He runs the School of Podcasting. He every Saturday morning asks the podcast coach. He is the 2017 Podcast Award winner in the technology category and a 2018 inductee into the Podcasting Hall of Fame. Mr. Dave Jackson.
Thank you, sir. Yes, this is always fun to do. Just my favorite thing was you mentioned the Hall of Fame. I the weekend before I went to that, there was a picnic for my brother. It was his birthday. And so we're out in the backyard and we're grilling up and my cousins are over. And finally my one cousin, it's like, oh, here comes Mr. Hall of Fame, poking at me. And she finally said, okay, I'm going to ask. And I go, what? And she goes, what's a podcast? And she goes, and I go, do you have an iPhone? And she goes, yeah. And I go, oh, cool. Look for the little purple thing. And she's like, okay. And about that time, my other cousin goes, I have an iPhone. I'm like, cool, find the little purple thing. And it was just this whole, in about 5 minutes, I taught probably 5 people how to find a podcast and look for it. And that to me is just something this is what we do on International Podcast Day, is to make sure, if nothing else, our friends and family know how to do that, because then they'll tell 2 friends and they'll tell 2 friends and so on and so forth. So looking forward to the celebration.
Well, we always appreciate it, Dave. And since you are part of the, let's call it the industry, we're going to get into a conversation here in a little bit about where podcasting is. Next is Jim Collison. And Jim is the host, the brains, the man behind the scenes of everything with the Average Guy Network at, I believe, Jim, it's averageguy.tv. Am I correct?
Boom, you got it. Nice job.
All right. You also co-host the Ask the Podcast Coach show with Dave on Saturdays mornings at 10:30 Pacific, I believe.
10:30 Eastern, 9:30 Central. Yeah.
Oh, that's why I have to get up so stinking early.
Yes, it's early.
Yeah, thanks, guys. And besides that, truly speaking from my heart, the nicest man in the world, period. And I appreciate everything you do in the space, Jim.
Well, Steve, thanks. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on. It's always a privilege. I always say happy Saturday morning to Dave when we do Ask the Podcast Coach, but happy Saturday afternoon here in the United States. Anyways, already Sunday, already the 30th in a lot of the parts around the world. Fun to be with you to kind of kick this off. It's a big deal and a big day. And Dave and I last podcast movement sat. I talked to him for a few minutes and I said, we got to do some great stuff on Podcast Day, on International Podcast Day. You guys have really done it this year. I mean, I was telling you in the pre-show that I'm seeing more traffic for this, both internationally and here in the United States. A lot of the podcasters we hang around are doing something. So you guys are on to something here. Thanks for letting me and hang out with one of my best friends in podcasting to get this thing started.
Well, thank you very much. And it's going to be a great first hour as we then roll into Around the World. And lastly, I want to mention one last thing. And he is currently in the chat room making jokes. That's Daniel J. Lewis, who is one of the rocks behind International Podcast Day. We could not do this without him. Unfortunately, he can't be with us this evening, but will be with us in the closing segment tomorrow evening. And Daniel, thank you very much. And your comic in the chat room is very entertaining, and I really appreciate it as always. So briefly, what is International Podcast Day? Because as we continue to grow, certainly there's new people getting involved. They have never heard of things. And truly, International Podcast Day is a celebration for podcasters, listeners, the industry, and anything to do with podcasting. And we felt it was important to have our own day. We just finished up or was it yesterday or today? National Coffee Day. I drink coffee, but do I care about it as a day? Doesn't do anything for me. I could care less. International Podcast Day. Oh, baby, I'm on, because we have this passion about evangelizing. We want to get the word out and distribute what podcasting is. Podcasting is one of the few things in this world, besides intimate family, I believe, that can change your life. Whether it's comedy, whether it's technology, whether it's a story, whether it's auto mechanics. I don't care. It can change your life when you put your earbuds in and listen to someone's podcast that has an impact to you on regardless of the topic of your interest. And that's what we're trying to do. Let's get that consumption going. Let's get this industry going, and let's really get out there and kick some butt. Now, the one thing I'm constantly asked, Steve, International Podcast Day is September 30. Yes, it is. Why are you starting on September 29? Okay, I'm going to answer it again. Because we are, at least I am, currently in the west coast of the United States. It is already September 30 in New Zealand. Has been for a few hours. And we're going to start traveling across the globe. So as you can see this structure behind attempting to do this, it becomes sometimes very confusing. And I go, Dave, what time? What? When? In putting together this schedule, and it's very interesting. So that is why, and it'll actually finish 1 October by the time we're finished. So it's a feat in itself, and we're going to do it. So over the next 30 hours, you're going to see on this stream some amazing podcasters from all over the world. But it's important for each of us to do important things. If you go to International Podcast Day, there is promotional material where there are graphics for you to use on social media as your profile, on your web page. There is audio and video for you to use. There are thank you cards that you can send to a podcaster to say, gosh darn it, thank you. We just don't do that enough, I don't believe. You know, it's difficult to do it in pretty much in the radio and TV sphere, but we have the capability to do it very easily. So I really suggest you send your podcaster that you listen to and just love, like me, a thank you card. It's really appreciated. And then an important thing, every year we have trended #1 on all social media platforms during the event using the hashtag International Podcast Day. And I'm going to shut up really, really quick because we got some good, wholesome, just meat and potato stuff to talk about, which is really great. So every year I am truly surprised at what the community comes up with. We don't rib them to do these kinds of things. It's just amazing at some of the events that they put together to celebrate International Podcast Day. And I just find it a joy to really see every year what some are doing. Now, I want to throw this at you because I came across this last evening as I was taking my last "Are we ready or not?" And I've got to show this to you because it really, to me, defines what the community is doing in relationship to International Podcast Day.
Oh, hey, Mark. I bet you can't guess what today is.
Pizza Day.
Nope.
Waffle Day, National Crayon Day, Purple Day.
Uh-uh.
All right, lightning round. Buzz me in when I get it.
Okay.
Spaghetti Day, Bean Day, Kiss a Ginger Day, Hat Day, Blue Monday, Winnie the Pooh Day, Hug Day, Pie Day, Peanut Butter Day, Peanut Butter Pie Day, Compliment Day, Fun at Work Day, No Fun at Work Day, Nutella Day, Bagel Day, Random Act of Kindness Day, Drink Wine Day, Drink Beer Day, Love Your Pet Day, Chili Day, Pig Day, Dr. Seuss Day, National High Five Day.
It's Podcast Day.
Well, I bet you can't guess what month it is.
Oh, come on, Mark. Everyone knows it's the month of baby safety, blueberry popsicles, cable TV, chicken, childhood obesity awareness, cholesterol education, classical music, college safety, coupons, fall hats, food safety, happy cats, head lice prevention, Hispanic heritage, honey, Italian cheese, international square dancing, Little League, mushrooms, piano, potatoes, preparedness, recovery, self-care awareness. That's an important one. Self-improvement, sewing, velociraptor awareness, whole grains, and yoga. And in alphabetical order, too.
No, it's September. Subscribe to our podcast.
Oh, hey, Mark, I bet you guessed. Try again.
Waffle Day, Purple Day, National Something Awareness Month.
Nope. I'll give him a reason to sigh.
Spaghetti Day. Bet you can't guess what.
Everyone knows it's a big long list of I can't remember. It's the month of baby safety, blueberry popsicles, all that. Stop it. Recovery, saving your photos, move the damn teleprompter, head lice prevention.
It's just so exciting.
Excited because it's podcast day. It's podcast day. It's podcast day.
Sorry, you're too chipper for my darkened soul. Subscribe to our podcast. I need an adult.
That's hilarious.
It's too funny. It's just I've watched it like 5 times, and props to the guys that are there, because Lord knows I can't even string 7 things in alphabetical order, let alone exactly what they did. So that you're right, Steve. There's just a lot of unique things that people are out there doing and sharing and creating. I've heard a lot of people are taking to different social medias to, instead of just post and tag different podcasts and their favorite podcasts, they're actually doing just like little videos now. And that's really cool to say, hey, this is the show I like. This is the reason why. Here's how to follow them. And that's just something you can do, in addition to all the different social meetups and different events that are going on from New Zealand to India to Poland to here in the United States. We have podcast festivals happening in Canada, podcast marathons going on in Chicago. There's just so much going on. And that video and everything we've seen online is just a brief image of the different and unique ways people are celebrating the day.
I truly appreciate it. And if you ever want to check these guys out, it's the 443 podcast. And I'll be getting in touch with him very soon to say thank you. And I used your content. So, Dave, you mentioned all the meetups. I know there's a lot of things going on, and it's great. And I think that's one of the beauties of what we've been doing with International Podcast Day is people are taking this and doing their own thing. And I truly appreciate that. So when we talk about podcasting and doing your own thing, Dave and Jim, I want to open up a discussion of, every year the space kind of twists and turns and moves a little bit different. And I know you guys either deal with podcasters or podcasting on a daily basis, and certainly on a weekly basis with Ask the Podcast Coach, where you're having discussions with many podcasters, but not just podcasters, but podcasting and the scope and the space of podcasting. What have there been things you have seen since last International Podcast Day that are kind of blooming or deflating, or how do you see where the space has been the last year?
Dave, I'll let you start.
Okay, so like you, me. I think the big one, just because it was recently, is you see the BuzzFeeds and the Panoplies, and so all these big people jumped in, and I actually find this fascinating because we've all preached, content is king, and it is. That's true, but you also have to, promote your show as well. I think they kind of proved in a way that if you build it, they will come is still not true. And this is what I was trying to think of when I was getting ready for this. Are those networks primarily were they based on radio people, or were they based on reporters? And that's the part I didn't know, because I know there were a lot of shows that got a big boost because they had reporters that would then cover them. Like they got all sorts of press coverage. And I'm like, what's because all their friends are working for magazines. But I think it's interesting because even if you have a team of 17, that doesn't ensure that you're going to be successful at this. And I also wonder sometimes what their expectations were. Like, because it was funny in a way, and by all means, this does not mean they were bad podcasts. I'm a weirdo. I listen to podcasts about podcasting, but I can't think of any, like I didn't listen to any BuzzFeed. I didn't listen to any Panoply, and I was trying to think of the other one. I think Audible also shut down some of their stuff. Jim, did you listen to any of the shows from those networks?
No, but that's not in my niche, and so for me, it's just a little bit different. It doesn't surprise me. We talked in the beginning of the year about, I think this is a year where the big ones get bigger and the ones that aren't struggling, and especially if they're doing it for numbers. We're going to see more of this, by the way. I don't think this is a trend just that's happening in September of 2018. think we're going to see a lot of folks give it a run, throw some money at it, because it does work. It works for us at Gallup, and we've gathered a community. I think the key is, and I think the reason they didn't make it, nobody knows who those people are. Like, they're not reaching. I don't think they're reaching out in the community. I think they thought if they created a quality product, it would just draw people. And I still think podcasting is a space where you still need to draw. I mean, you got to reach your audience personally. Do things like show up at meetups, or do things like connect individually with your users. I made 2 phone calls on Friday to listeners at work that, things showed up on Facebook that it's like, hey, we should probably talk about this. And both of them said, I'm super surprised you even called. Like, someone's calling me direct. I think as podcasters, because our audience tends or can be smaller, I think we have an amazing opportunity to connect individually with our listeners, which just doesn't happen. I don't think it happens at the big levels. Like, I don't think they have those opportunities. So go ahead, Dave.
Well, that's a great point, because if somebody asked me right now, like, where should I go to get a t-shirt made, and they should be paying me for this, I would say Teespring. Or I'm sorry, I probably just said the wrong one. TeePublic. That's funny.
They both.
That's hilarious.
And Amazon. Well, while we're being fair, Amazon does it too.
Well, yeah, TeePublic. But part of that is, well, here's the thing. I don't know anybody at Teespring, but I know James at TeePublic, and they've been at different podcast events. And so that's hilarious that I did that, because the whole time in my brain I'm going, don't say Teespring.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah. But it was it's hilarious. And I think that's part of it. I think that's a big chunk of growing your audience, is going out and mingling with them. It's like you said with your Gallup show, you're out there, and I think it depends too on again, your expectations. You're able to link things to your business, to your podcast. And I'm not sure, maybe some of these other people, I'm not sure what they're measuring or what their goal was, but
well, Dave, it's tough when you're gonna throw 15 producers at something. Your motivations have to change, right? You have to see an ROI, and it's just, I think we still live in a difficult advertising space today. No one has yet figured out the advertising, the way to make that work for everybody. And so, what is their product to sell? We fortunately, when I podcast at work, it's all supporting a product that actually makes real money, right? We sell real things, and not, we're not based. I don't have to base my podcasts on advertising at that point. When you're in that space, when you're a BuzzFeed, and you're just trying to basically bring people back to your site, and then you invest a bunch of money in doing that, I think the ROI is really difficult on those. So I think we're going to still continue to see folks do this, because I think it does work. You just got to get the metrics right in it,
right,
and think through that.
And a great question for you: how many people are on your podcast team?
At Gallup, I do have 5.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's not their full-time roles, right? And it's dotted line responsibilities, and we're very efficient about the way we do it. I just had a meeting on Friday, though. Let me be honest. I just had a meeting with a senior leader on Friday who is questioning some of the hours that are coming in on those people that I'm using. I got hey, maybe your blog posts are a little too long, or, hey, maybe it's taking too much time to edit these. So in that space, I get that kind of pressure. And I think that's the same kind of pressure we see with some of the larger organizations.
Well, that's the reason I ask is I'm into, because it's out of Cleveland. They're basing it on Cleveland this year. I was listening to season 3 of Serial, and I started to laugh because I started to count, and I think it was episode 3. They listed 30 different names at the end of the show, and there's nothing wrong with that as long as your budget can pay for that.
Right.
And that was the thing I was curious about. I was like, wait, if we get into these huge teams, that now the ROI becomes really kind of like, holy cow, we got to feed 17 people. That gets a little expensive. So,
well, and you got to make economies of scale work. And so it's just a whole different, like I said, we're going to see more of this. Steve, you said, what's changed since last International Podcast Day. And I think we're going to see more and more money flow at this. I think people know it works. You just got to get the metrics right. In the enterprise, they are going to go hard and fast and cut. This is where it's different than your independent podcasters who do this out of passion. They're coming at it. They're going to do it for 6 to 8, 9 months. See if it makes see if it makes anything. Then they're going to cut and run. So as independent podcasters, I think we need to be, because I live on both sides of the fence, right? I do this both. I get paid to do it at work, and we have kind of a network of podcasts there, and then I have a couple independent ones. I think as independent podcasters, we should not mimic what the enterprise does. Don't do that. You could, but I think it's just more risky. And don't be worried about them. Like,
Right.
let them do their thing. And some of them, because they're going to put a whole bunch of money after it, are going to be good. Like, we're going to have a few that are going to hit, but I think we're going to see more high profile, and then they're going to blow out faster. And we just don't worry about those things. Just keep doing your thing and let the enterprise guys spend that money. That's how they operate.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, what you're going to do is you're going to have consolidation, right, of some of these podcast companies like the Panoplies and BuzzFeed, and you're going to have the acquisitions, and then you're going to see, as you said, Jim and Dave, is you're going to have a large volume of assets and money and infrastructure that's put into it. And to your point, yes, that is for a very select group of podcasts and podcasters out there. For the rest of the community, the independent podcasters, the ones that are doing it, as a small business, asset to add to their portfolio of what they do what you do. Be consistent, be honorable, and create just good content. Create good SEO. Make sure your show notes. Make sure you're connecting with your audience, because I will shadow that is a majority of the independent podcasters are willing to get out there, share their information on various social media sites, Reddit, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, whatever. But the beauty of it is that they're interacting with their audience. If you, and I hate to say it, but you go to some of the larger, podcast companies, and you go to a posting on Twitter, and all you see is just a bunch of comments. You never see replies from the host or from the company itself. And again, that's how they're running their business. That's how they model it. They're still, like you said, trying to gauge that metric, but at the same time, just do what you do as a podcaster. Trust that the path that's been laid over the last 14, 15 years is getting better. We do have a number of tools at our disposal to create that opportunity to connect with our audience. And like you said, Jim, a phone call, a tweet, a direct message, an email, that goes an incredibly long way. And I can say for a fact, as a podcaster, it's helped our listener base. It's helped me out personally. And of course, on the international podcast scale, we often get, Steve and I get these emails like, oh, I didn't think anybody was going to respond, or I thank you for the retweet, that just shows that people want to be heard, that their independent projects are still so meaningful for them. So yeah, with taking this whole, big shift in the podcasting space, take it for what it's worth. They're going to come and go, just as, every podcaster will go through one show, get another one. It's stay the course, do what you do best, and continue to build that community that we're all so good at.
Yeah, I'm a shout out to Daniel in the chat room. I just heard him on another podcast, and he said he's excited because these, radio right now is jumping in. There was actually a track. That's something that's different. There was a track at Podcast Movement for radio people. And so as those radio people bring in a wider audience, that's great. Let them do their wide content and talk about business and life, and just like it's a newspaper. And then all the independents can take over all those hyper niche topics that will fill that void. So that's definitely something that's changed with radio coming on board. I know every event I went to this year, it was bigger than the year before, whether that was Podfest, Podcast Movement. I know DC Podfest is next month, but they already moved to a new venue. So they're all getting bigger. And I just saw a report where Google Podcasts, of course, is new. That wasn't around last year. And that came out, and they were saying that it's already got about 5% of the market. And of course, Spotify finally opened up their doors to everybody. That was another one. And that's really seems to be starting to really make a sizable chunk of listeners over there, which I don't know. I didn't see that coming. I thought it'd be nice, but they tried that in Google Play. Of course, Google Play Music never was rolled out worldwide, and Spotify was. But it sounds like we're getting a slightly younger demographic on Spotify, so that's another good news. But those are things where where things are, more people are listening. So that's all good news.
Dave, I think we've got an opportunity with the younger audience, though, still out there. And I interview hundreds of students a year and work with some in some of the work that I do. And I ask them all the time. It's become one of my standard interview questions is, so I ask them a question like, how do you keep up with the current technology? How do you learn? And then I'll follow up with, are you listening to a podcast? Just because I can, right? It's my prerogative. Many times they're still saying no at the high school and college level. So I don't think now if you ask them, are they watching YouTube? Completely different. Like they're learning on YouTube and they're learning from things that are podcasts, but they're not seeing it as a podcast. And so I think we still have some opportunity to convert from YouTube. Like that's a tremendous opportunity for us. And in the podcasting community, we see this, Dave, you and I see this in the Facebook groups all the time. Should I be posting my podcast to YouTube? And how you do that, I think, is key. And then how you convert them back to your podcast, I think, is also key. So I'm not sure as a community we're as strong as we could be in the area of converting YouTube watches to podcasts. So I just think we have some opportunities there.
Yeah, I think, to me, I've never been picky. I don't care where people consume my information as long as they're consuming my information. I know what I'm going to do tomorrow, and I've told a few people about this, and I got the idea from a listener of ours, Carrie Porter Bond, because there was a report that James Cridland was talking about, and they were explaining why some people don't listen to podcasts, and one of the answers was, why would I listen? They didn't know what they were missing. So Carrie put up a post and said, tell me about what hobbies you're interested in. And as soon as somebody would answer, she'd go find them a podcast. And then I remember somebody said banjo. So I went out and Googled banjo podcast, and sure enough, here's one to listen to. And so I'm going to do that tomorrow as kind of my celebration thing. And that's another one. I think people, they hear the phrase, occasionally you'll hear it in TV, or you'll hear Jimmy Fallon talk about it. Or I was listening to the actual radio. That's hard to believe, but I was listening to a sports station, and there was somebody from the Pittsburgh Steelers, Tiki Barber. I think that's right. And Tiki Barber has a podcast. He's like, because it was like whatever it was, 95.5 the Fox or the Fan or whatever it was, and all of a sudden this guy came on, hey, this is Tiki Barber, listen to my podcast, and blah blah blah. And it's like, that's cool that somebody on the radio is promoting a podcast. So I think we all just need to again, just get out and start talking about podcasting, and I think we'll see that number bump up even more. I just had it, the because people talk about how it's only 2 or 3%, but I looked at the Edison research, and if you go back just 5 years to 2013, we're at 7% of people were listening on a weekly basis. So in 5 years, we're now up to 17%. That's more than double in 5 years. So that's something on my name, something else that has doubled, in 5 years, besides, I don't know, something that's very internet, Amazon Echo usage or something like that. But, radio use, no. Newspaper use, no. Podcasting, yes. So I'm glad to see it's definitely headed in the right direction.
Yeah, I think we as podcasters are seizing that opportunity, as Jim and Dave, you have mentioned, is that we have so many opportunities to integrate podcasting into our daily conversations, whether it's in the middle of a work meeting, whether it's on a walk with a friend, whether it's meeting somebody at a coffee shop, whatever the situation is, you should always find a way to say, hey, well, guess what I heard on a podcast, and that's that opportunity to kind of, as you said, don't recommend your show right off the bat. If Steve and I have been doing a tech show for 11 years, I know half of my friends do not care about technology, right? They just want their phone. They want to go to work. Fine. But if they're into the UCLA Bruins football team, if they're into banjo playing, if they're into any sort of unique niche, there's something out there for them. And so make sure you take that 5-10 minutes, that opportunity that's there to not shy away from sharing about podcasts, because I've always thought that was a bit of a hindrance in our space, is that people, it's hard to self-promote, right? I think we can all agree with that. It's like, here, listen to my show, listen to my show, listen to my show. You need to find a different way to expose people to a podcast, and that's not talking about you. It's not talking about your show. It's talking about the industry in general, what they can do, whether it's true crime, whether it's, religious-based podcasts, whatever it may be. find any opportunity you can to fit in to your conversation, how to just expose somebody to it. And I think that's, as you said, understanding the YouTube influence with the youth and just sort of the demographics that are going on. We have to capitalize on that. And I think it's super important for the growth of our media.
Yeah, no, you're right on with that, Dave. And I, we've I kind of disagree with you a little bit on promoting your podcast first. And I think there's a great opportunity, to oftentimes as I was out recruiting. This is the busy college recruiting season for us, and so I've been out talking to college students, and they'll often ask me, what do you do for Gallup? And I've stopped actually in some ways saying I'm a podcaster, and I've been starting saying I'm a YouTuber, and that gets their attention. Like they go, I mean, like as soon as I say YouTube, they are like, boom, they know what that is. And then I can change. Then I can be like, yeah. And so I do work for Gallup on YouTube, but we create these podcasts as we do this, and it gives me that opportunity to kind of have that. You kind of pull them in with that hook. They understand that, and to be honest, they understand podcast too. Like it's not a foreign word, right? They get that part. But it's been interesting this year as I've changed that speech from saying, and I'm a YouTuber for Gallup. Man, their eyes light up and they're like, oh, a word I know. They latch onto it. And so like I said, I think we've got an opportunity in our vernacular, and I wouldn't hesitate to share our podcast first. And I would say when I was in recruiting for technology positions, and I would say, and I have this tech show that I do, we would make the connection. And I don't know how many will come and listen to it. I have heard years later of students who listened to my podcast because they ran into it because of the work that I do at Gallup, who now are Home Gadget Geeks listeners. And they're like, oh yeah, I've been listening to you for a lot of years. And that's the other thing. I think we don't realize how many people listen and never say anything.
Exactly.
I started this robot lawnmower project that I'm going to do at Home Gadget Geeks. And I said, send me emails about that. I'd like to know your opinion. I'm getting emails from people I've never heard of before, in my network, but who are excited about this project. And so I think a lot of times we just don't know everybody that's out there.
No, I think that's a fair statement, Jim. And I'll backtrack my, if that's the way to introduce somebody into podcasting is to mention yours.
Yeah.
But again, it's that when you don't, when that opportunity exists and the only thing you want to do is promote yourself, that's where that line is. And yeah,
Totally.
if it's the opportunity, hey, I do a tech podcast. Oh, cool. What do you talk about? Awesome. Well, what are you interested in? So use that as a transition, right? As a means of introduction. So if that's the way you do it, great. So yeah, go ahead, Dave. I know you had a comment.
Well, I'm just laughing at the chat room is having their own conversation as always. And so somebody threw out, we're talking about niche things that you like, and somebody put in all caps and exclamation points, bacon. So I Googled the phrase bacon podcast. And sure enough, now granted, it's not about bacon. The guy talks about marketing, but he's talking about selling the sizzle, and he has all these pictures of bacon on it. And somebody just threw out the word avocado, and there is the naughty avocado or something, exotic avocado podcast. So that's going to be the fun part of this, is seeing if somebody can throw up a a unique enough podcast that I actually can't, or a topic that I can't find a podcast about. I mean, when we have chameleon breeding, I was on a show last night for International Podcast Day about speed cubing, and I'm like, speed cubing? And it's people that do Rubik's cubes, and they do it faster than my brain can keep up with. And it was funny because he wanted to bring me on the show and ask about Rubik's Cube. And I go, realize when I got my Rubik's Cube, there wasn't the internet and there was no YouTube. I go, so I played with it for like an hour and a half until I got frustrated, and then I never picked it up again. And these kids are doing Rubik's Cubes, and literally like the world record is like 4.2 seconds. And I was like, okay, I can't even fathom that. But there are a lot of, I think it's one of those things where Apple used to have that commercial. There's an app for that. And I think now it's going to be, there's a podcast for that.
This is all very interesting. And one comment first, and then I'll move on. And that is, Dave, I doubt you were listening to terrestrial radio for sports and trying to find good information about the Cleveland Browns. I'll just
No,
leave
it's
it at that.
not going to happen.
Hey, they won a game. Let's be careful
That's
now.
right. Never seen so many people get excited for a tie in my life.
They're not defeated any longer.
That is a true statement. One of the struggles, I won't say struggles, one of the things we have constantly discussed here at International Podcast Day is it's pretty simplistic based on our format and what our objective is to get podcasters involved with what we're doing, podcaster to podcaster, us to them, country to country, discussion, assistance, whatever the case may be. But one of the things we have attempted to tackle, and it's been very, very difficult, is how to bring in the listener base into what we're trying to do. And it's very hard because if you don't know something about something, how do you get somebody to be involved with if they don't know about it? And so that preaching of the word of podcasting and going out and reaching and touching people to allow whatever the vehicle is to educate them on what this great thing is called podcasting, it's a challenge. And so I speak to everybody here that's listening and in the future that one of our objectives to all of us, I believe, is to continually get the word out. And it's something that's been very hard to tackle from a larger platform like this, but it's truly needed.
Yeah, I think one thing that we've done here with the International Podcast Day team is each year we've had somebody who is a non-podcaster that has joined our live stream. Someone who's still very comfortable behind the mic, very comfortable with what they're doing. The last couple of years, we've had Adela from Podcast Brunch Club, who is now podcasting, but she started just creating Podcast Brunch Club meetups around the world and really creating listener parties, right? And having a time essentially like a book club to come together. We've had her highlighted. Last year, we had Ariel Niesenblatt from Earbuds Podcast Collective. And she is sharing via a newsletter what they're doing within the podcasting space, recommending to listeners new shows week in and week out, day by day. And this year, we have Elena Fernandez Collins. She's from Puerto Rico, now in Portland, who runs the Audio Dramatic newsletter. And she's going to be sharing audio fiction as a diverse gateway to podcasting. And as you said, Steve, it's important to connect with the listeners just as it is to share and create information and resources and tools to individual podcasters in the space. And so I think by us including them into this conversation, it shows, they are, without them, this event and these podcasts, fall flat on their faces. But it's cool to see that over the last couple of years, we've had listeners that have really started to engage with the process, and that again is that new opportunity that exists for a lot of us to continue to expand this industry.
See, that's awesome. That inspires me. Stuff like that. It's like when you're a person, I don't know, that only likes, you think that you're the only person that likes this maybe off topic kind of thing. And when you find somebody else, it's like I don't know. I don't, but let's say I liked name me a housewife show. What is the name of those shows anyway?
Real Housewives of New York. Let's go with that.
Real Housewives of New York. Let's say I actually like that show and I'm thinking nobody else that's in my age and my demographic likes that show. And if I find somebody else, we're going to go bonkers when I'm like, oh my God, you watch the Housewives of New York too? And we're going to have so much to get with. And all of a sudden I don't feel so alone. And so when I see these other people that are doing these little brunches and doing different ways of promoting it, then I think that puts gas in our tank. Like, okay, if they can do it, then I can do it. And plus we can also learn, like, what are you doing for your brunch? And how did you organize it? And how do you get the word out? They might be doing something like, oh, wow, that's a really good idea. I'm going to try that over here. And then, then we all grow together. So that would be very, very cool. Jim, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think we have an opportunity, and we're doing better at this, but to get each other on each other's podcasts, and the diversification is good for us, where in radio, I think it's not. And because the diversity or the distributed nature of podcasting, which will, I think, inherently keep it from consolidating like newspapers did, like radio did and like television did, right? All those forms of media consolidated. Part of that is the cost. And no matter what we do, I don't think podcasting will ever get that expensive, right? And so it is it's forced diversification because of its low barrier to entry. And I think, by the way, that's really, really good. But I think we can continue to invite each other. And, I've had Dave, of course, Dave and I podcast together. I've shown up on School of Podcasting from time to time. And Dave has been on my tech show, and we've done it that way. And I think that's a good model for us to continue, because then people hear, oh, hey, wait a minute, Jim had a guy who talks about podcasting on a show. Maybe I should look into whatever, right? I've had these guests, these other podcasters. By the way, other podcasters make some of the best guests on the planet because they know how to do this thing. Like, you don't have to. At Gallup, I work with guests all the time, and they're not podcasters. And oh man, it is a ton of work to get them on there. Now, it's worth it, right? It's worth it to have them on there. But getting other podcasters. So we talk about this. I mean, there's newsletters dedicated to this and sites dedicated to it. But I think we can still do a better job of having, cross-pollinating concepts, ideas around in our shows by having a diverse other set of guests on there to bring diversity to what we're trying to do. So it's not just always two guys or two gals or whatever talking into the mic. So I think we have some opportunities there.
Well, guys, as we get near the end of this hour, because we are going to start going around the world, I got a couple items I do need to finish up, and appreciate the conversation. And I think it's something that we need to continue to do. It's very critical. One of the very important aspects also of International Podcast Day is the sponsors every year for the event. And to be truly honest with you, we don't do this necessarily for a monetization reason. We do this to bring new and existing services to you that I feel that you should check out as a part of International Podcast Day. And Dave Lee, if you wouldn't mind just briefly going through them very quickly, and then if you could give us a brief overview of the upcoming schedule for the next 30 hours.
Yeah, absolutely. Every year, Steve and I and the International Podcast team are so grateful for the sponsors that are out there. You can learn more at internationalpodcastday.com/sponsors. Our platinum sponsor, 3 years running, is Blueberry. Of course, Blueberry, if you're not familiar, they're a full-service podcasting company providing podcast hosting, stats, advertising opportunities, and is the home of the PowerPress podcasting plugin for WordPress. They also offer free WordPress hosting and podcast pro podcast stats with every podcast hosting account. You can find more at blueberry.com. Also, we have two really awesome silver sponsors this year. The first one is Repurpose. And it's interesting, Jim, you brought up the whole YouTube thing, is because repurpose.io automatically converts your audio podcast into engaging videos and uploads them, of course, to YouTube, Facebook, and a variety of other social media channels. So you can try actually Repurpose for free today, repurpose.io/IPD. And of course, you can start growing your audience faster and immediately with that. And of course, if you want to save 20% on your yearly plan, just use the discount code IPD. And of course, our other silver sponsor, Podcast Success Academy, really excited to have the likes of the Podcast Success Academy, which is built off of Mark and Jessica and James, the individuals behind podcast websites. And this academy is actually going to teach podcasters the skills that no one told them that they needed to succeed. So they have a resource-packed community with tools that include workshops, tutorials, courses, and of course, it's free. You can claim your free access at podcastsuccessacademy.com. We really encourage everybody to utilize those sponsors. They're fantastic here in the podcasting space. And of course, real quickly, we do have a number of celebration supporters that have joined us this year. It is Podbean, AdvertiseCast, Resonant Recordings, Matt Talk Online, Podcast Movement, Podfest Multimedia Expo, Wave, Outlier HQ, Podcast Village, Benstown, the Audacity Podcast, the Waves of Tech, and of course, Pod Tips Pro. So, Steve, it is an exciting time in the podcasting space. Thank you to all the sponsors that are out there. And of course, without their support, we could not have put this schedule together that we have over the next 30 hours. And we have 16 countries, as I mentioned. We're going to kick off next hour with an individual from Trinidad and Tobago. Then we're going to throw it all the way to New Zealand, come back to Canada, go to China. Then we're going to come back to India. And we're just kind of all over the place. We have Portugal, we have Italy, we have the United Arab Emirates, we have Poland, Italy. The list could go on, guys. And it's amazing that all these individuals, a very diverse group of people. And that's one thing, as we were talking about earlier, was, the podcasting space is dynamic. It's changing. And we want our event to be representative of everything that's going on in the space. And so you can head over to our website, check out the speakers tab, and just find our awesome, diverse, amazing podcasters that are out there. And Steve, we're going to be covering loads of things, everything from how to create connections to grow your podcast, to what are the podcast scenes overseas in the United Arab Emirates, what's happening in France, what's happening in Portugal, things that are exciting to, I think, a lot of us. But then again, we're going to have some real nitty gritty stuff where it's like Eileen Smith here in town. Or in the United States. She's going to talk about how using live events as a podcast growth strategy. It's called Let's Have Brunch. And it's just really incredible to see what everybody's doing. 5 pillars to creating the ultimate podcast brand. What's going on in education right now in podcasts is amazing. Chris Nessie's going to be sharing the power of podcasts in education. And that's just the tip of the iceberg for what we have scheduled for the next 30 hours. So again, thank you to all our podcasters out there from all the different countries. They have volunteered their time and their efforts, and I cannot wait to hear their expertise, their messages, and their knowledge with our international community.
Thank you for that, Dave. And certainly don't forget the Podcast Awards coming up tomorrow at 5 p.m. Pacific time. It's always a great event that we, last year and this year, are hosting on International Podcast Day. So as you see, we've got a diverse amount of information. If you come back at different times, you perhaps might see the live stream and the chat room in different languages. It's cool because it's in their native tongue, talking to their people. You may see hundreds of people conversing, or you may be a few, depending where we're at that point in the timeline. So final thoughts. So we'll go Dave, and Jim for final thoughts, and we'll be out of here.
Oh, well, which Dave? Coin flip. I'll go first. How about that, Mr. Jackson? Yeah, it's amazing year in, year out. I can't thank the podcasting community and the podcast listeners out there that have really driven this event to be what it is today. Definitely encourage you to get out there, use the hashtag, but also more importantly, as Steve mentioned at the top of this hour, you celebrate the way you want to celebrate, right? We have our 30-hour broadcast. We do what we do. If you want to schedule a meetup, if you're a podcast, you want to give some free books, some free mugs, free shirts, do that. If you want to reach out to individual podcasters that you love and rate and review those shows, awesome. You do what you want to do this day to celebrate, make it unique, and make sure you are sharing what a podcast is, because we all know that there's tremendous power in podcasts.
Yeah, and ditto to what basically he just said. I think the bottom line is, don't think about doing something, get out and actually do something. And it doesn't, and I know you might be saying, well, I could email my host, but I mean, it's only an email. No, you don't realize there are times as a podcaster, we're like going, is this thing on? Hello. And when we get an email from somebody that says, wow, I really liked what you did in that last show, yada, 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 it puts so much gas in the podcaster's tank. So, or if it's a review or whatever you're doing, just don't put it off. Do it right now while you're listening to us. Open up another screen, get going, and celebrate International Podcast Day.
Dave and Steve, I would say thanks for the tireless hours you guys have put into this. You've done this year over year. It always hasn't been easy. You guys, there's no one thanks you enough for the work that this is. It's hard work. It's a lot of long hours. It's a lot of coordination. It's people committing and then decommitting. It's somebody at the last minute bailing on you, or even worse, someone saying, "Oh, I thought I had that slot," and they didn't make it on the list. Right? All these thankless details that have to go into it. So, guys, this is a really important movement around the world, and you guys have taken it and done a really nice job, because the first one is fun. The second one is almost always terrible. And then it's the third one and on, right, that where things really get better. So I want to say thank you to the two of you who have really done this and really made this happen. I would say on my way out, take this thing to work. Like many of you independent podcasters are doing this on the side, and many of you could be translating or turning this into a work podcast. Take a risk, take it to work, ask somebody if you can start podcasting about your brand or your product or whatever. See if you can take that skill there. It's been great for me, and I encourage you to do it as well. So guys, thanks for inviting me on as well. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for the kind words, Jim.
You bet.
Well, thank you for everybody for joining us for the kickoff session of International Podcast Day. Just one small portion of what's going on around the world. What will you do for International Podcast Day? It's totally up to you. So we're going to be signing off now. We're going to be bringing on the next guest from Trinidad, Tobago. And what an interesting story this is. You're definitely not going to miss it. We'll be back in 1 minute.